everybody. Welcome to Cloud Communications Alliance, the continuation of our webinar series. I'm Joe Marion, President of Cloud Communications Alliance. I'm real excited excited is probably not the right word, maybe more concerned about today's webinar. What's going on with 10DLC is going to affect every one of us, and you'll hear more detail from the experts in a minute. Before I switch slides, we have an error on the first slide, and so if anybody wants to text into the group chat, the first person who can identify the error, you'll get a free ticket to the CloudCom Summit in London, which is going to be, what's the date of that, Karen? Do you have it in front of you?
March 10th.
March 10th. So if you can find the error, text it. We'd love to see you in London. Okay. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Mark Iannuzzi. We have Linda McReynolds. We have Ari Rabban. I believe, if I'm pronouncing it right, it's the same as the perfume. Right, Ari?
Yep.
And we have Tim Lin from Sagama. We have three of or four of the best experts on 10DLC, I think, in the world. We've been discussing this issue now for about a month, and we've kind of delved pretty deep into it. So with that, let me turn over to the chairman of our Government Affairs Committee, Mark Iannuzzi. Mark, take it.
Joe, thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everybody, or morning, I guess, depending on where you're at. Yeah, I'm delighted to be able to get together today. We have been looking at this issue here for a few months from the Regulatory and Government Affairs group here at the CCA. As everybody knows, text messaging is prolific. It is fundamental to modern communications. Back in 2018, those things changed. SMS texting was reclassified as an information service by the FCC. And what this did is it granted U.S. mobile carriers the abilities to regulate the rules of how SMS may be sent, what type of content may be sent, the implementation and management of fees and different types of SMS. And then now more recently, why it came into more prominence now, back last year in 2021, these same U.S. carriers reclassified all business SMS as what they call 10DLC, and Linda will talk about this in a second. And in particular, what they call A to P, or application to person. So this is a new type of SMS with numerous new regulations, registration requirements, and fees. And failure to comply with these new regulations can result in increased costs, text messages being blocked, and actually significant fines. So as Joe indicated, we have a great panel here to talk about it. So first up is Linda McReynolds. She's an attorney at the Common Law Group. Linda is going to dig into what exactly 10DLC is, the structural nature of it in this new industry framework, and what's driving these changes. Then following on there, we got Ari Rabban. He's the CEO of Phone.com. He's going to share with us some practical issues and insights regarding his experience as a service provider as to what challenges and burdens this thing has created. And then rounding out our conversation today is Tim Lin. Pleased to have him. He's a product manager at Sangoma. And Tim has insight into guidance and how they partner with service providers to help comply with these regulations and ways to offset costs and improve deliverability. As Joe indicated, we have our chat session at the end. We're going to have a Q&A, so please enter your questions along the way, and we'll get them at the end. And then at the end here, we hope to round out the presentation about things that the CCA is doing to pursue this issue with mobile carriers and trying to help take something that I think is a good idea, but maybe not implemented very well. So with that, Linda, how about we start her out?
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to the CCA. Thank you for everyone who's joining today for this lunchtime presentation. This topic has come up in my practice because a lot of our clients are in the cloud communications space, and this is evolving. And so I want to talk today about just the background, how these opportunities first presented themselves, what are some business opportunities for cloud communications providers, for consumers, and how to allocate risks among all of the parties, from your customers, the cloud communications providers, and your vendors in this business text messaging space. So just to give a little background about, can you feedback? We can the next one.
Hang on, we're going to figure out where that's coming from.
I'm waiting for name.
Linda, keep going. You should be okay now.
Okay, we can move to the next slide. So just a little background on 10-digit long codes. 10-digit long codes, or 10 DLC, are a way that you can enable a local landline phone number that traditionally has been used for voice, and you can use that phone number for bulk text messaging. So we are familiar, just the ordinary use from a smartphone. We can send text messages from our phone number. Someone can call us back at that phone number. And so in the end user consumer space, we're very familiar with just person-to-person conversational text messaging. Previously, if businesses wanted to send a bulk promotional message, or think about two-factor authentication or other bulk messages, you're probably familiar with receiving these short codes on the phone. Maybe a campaign, a political campaign text that's sent through a short code. Now, short codes are fairly expensive. There are monthly fees, but this was a way that entities could send out a broad mass text message campaign to consumers. But these were often used for spam, unsolicited marketing campaigns, and customers had no idea who these were coming from. So you couldn't call that number back, didn't necessarily trust the short code. So 10-digit long codes are a way for businesses to send a text message to their customers from their own phone number. A customer can call that number back. They recognize who the number is from. So one use case you might think of is like a doctor's office that has some sort of application that shows what are the appointments for the day, and they can send out a confirmation email maybe the day before appointments, a little appointment reminder text. The patient sees who it's from, could call back to confirm to that same number, or text back, and you're actually texting a person. And so it's a little more like a conversational text message, but these are going out in bulk. Another option, just to mention, as we think about this evolution of ways that businesses can text message multiple people, toll-free numbers have been used for text messaging. So short codes, toll-free messaging, and now 10-digit long codes, or 10 DLC, are all avenues that businesses can use. So I want to talk a little, I've mentioned a little of the benefits both to businesses and to consumers of 10 DLC. Consumers know who this number is from. It can be the throughput of using 10 DLC for bulk text messaging can be more cost effective for businesses than short codes. Again, you can use the same number, it's recognizable, and you can possibly send out, a greater throughput. So this is something, a technical issue that we won't get into a deep dive about how many text messages can you send, but that's another issue with the 10 DLC space. But there are risks that consumers do trust these numbers. And so if 10 DLC is used by bad actors, or it's used for spam or fraud, there's a need to protect consumers. So you have some control who is sending these text messages, so they're not hidden in case they're violating laws or creating, just eroding trust in what could be a really trusted, valuable channel. So, thinking about robocalling spam for years, like the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, the TCPA, other legislation and regulatory regimes have been very popular among consumers because they are to protect consumers from nuisances, calls, promotional calls at dinner time, to spoofed spam text messages on your phone. The FCC has been very strong, I'll say, in their public statements and their efforts and their regulatory work in protecting consumers from unwanted robocalls. And under the TCPA, text messages are also considered calls. So that's under court precedent. So even though text messaging is classified as an information service, text messages are calls when you look at text message marketing restrictions under federal legislation. And the FCC has authority to implement regulations under the TCPA. So the FCC has done a number of things, and one of them is the stir-shaken framework, which many people in the cloud communication space are, and in this space are familiar with. The purpose of the stir-shaken framework is authentication of who is making calls, who is transmitting and terminating calls. You want to be able to trace back and find out who is responsible if there are unlawful, unsolicited robocalls and text messaging. So in the same, in a parallel track, the wireless industry has developed its own voluntary best practices. The CTIA has established its messaging principles and best practices. And again, these are voluntary, and they are promulgated among the wireless industry and other vendors, wholesalers along that ecosystem, ways to protect consumers from unsolicited robocalls and spam text messages. So for example, among the best practices of these messaging principles is that you would obtain consent before sending text messages. So what is interesting in this area, and I keep using the word evolving because it is evolving, as the FCC develops regulations and the FCC defines what is unsolicited or unwanted, or what is sent by an auto dialer. There are court cases, legislative definitions in FCC orders, and then we have another set of definitions that emanate from these industry efforts to I'll say self-regulate, if you will, so that the industry engages in best practices as well. So as you start to dig in and look at what are business text messages, what is an application to person text message, what is peer-to-peer, these are all definitions that, as we'll talk about a little bit today, have created some confusion in the 10DLC space. So I just want to tee that up here by pointing out that the CTIA messaging principles and best practices that have been incorporated by carriers and vendors as their standards and policies are not necessarily regulations. The standards and policies may indeed be stricter than what is required by law. So kind of growing from these industry best practices, US carriers and who are wanting to protect their own customers. So this is an important piece. So for people who are businesses, entities that are sending text messages to a carrier's customer, the carriers want to protect their own customers from unsolicited spam and robocalls. And the FCC, through the stir-shaken framework, has empowered the carriers to block robocalls, and in many ways requires them to come up with ways, an authentication framework to block or authenticate calls that are passing through the network. So as one way in the 10DLC space, if a business is going to use their local landline phone number to send out bulk text messages to their customers, or really any business text messages, it's sort of turning into this broader, business text messaging using 10DLC, must be registered with the campaign registry. So the campaign registry, capital T, the campaign registry is a third party that the MNOs use as a centralized, I'll call it a database, where anyone who wants to use their local landline phone number to send out bulk text messages has to register the numbers, so that if a carrier's customer gets a text message from that number, they're able to sort of trace back who sent that and why, and potentially block that text message before it ever goes out if it doesn't meet certain standards. And these standards, as we'll get into, are not regulatory standards. These are industry standards that have grown from the FCC's framework. So it's not the campaign registry. Again, it's a private entity. This isn't government controlled. The industry is creating these standards, and the campaign registry is a database that has a lot of information about who is sending messages. So it could be a political campaign, a sole proprietor, the doctor's office example that I gave you, or it could be a telemarketing business that wants to send out a promotional campaign to as many numbers as possible. So you have a range of use cases where a business might want to send a text message, and it could be to a few known people with whom they have an ongoing years-long relationship. Could be a broader campaign that you're sending out to a mass of people. But in either case, the campaign registry will collect information about who is sending the text message and why, and even the content of those messages. So this is a sort of a checklist, and I want to emphasize that you know, this is sort of evolving, as I keep using that word. And so if you go into the campaign registry to register a campaign, you might think, what I'm doing isn't a campaign at all, or what my customers, for cloud communications providers, what my customers are using, they're using their local landline phone in ways that I wouldn't consider to be a campaign. It's not really even a brand or multiple brands. And so sometimes these categories might not quite fit or make logical sense. And so, what I've found among my clients is that you work with your vendors and you work with these categories. It's not all cut and dry, but you would list a company name, or if it's a sole proprietor, you provide some contact information for that person or that entity, a brand, and then the campaign. So the name of the campaign, the purpose, and some sample messages. And these are all reviewed ostensibly, and the phone numbers that are used for the campaign are also registered in this way. And then there are fees that vendors and the MNOs may impose, might not impose. This is, sometimes you see that the brand registration fee is passed on to the customer or to the business, the per message fees. Sometimes other entities along this kind of ecosystem absorb these costs. And so there are a variety of ways that these costs can be passed on. And each MNO, as MNOs come on board and develop their own penalties and fees, it varies among MNOs as well. So again, this isn't a regulatory fee. This is something that's set up by the industry as a way to keep 10-digit long code text messaging a trusted channel for business text messaging. So failure to register, this is something that really, this is the point when I hear from my clients. So this is how I've been learning about this, is kind of going backwards from the point when a cloud communications provider is either threatened with having text messages that it sends out on behalf of its customers blocked, or there's the threat of the imposition of steep fines and penalties for unregistered text messaging. And again, this varies. And so there's not an across the board, it's not a regulatory fine, but this is a push to get people to register these numbers or face these consequences. So there have been some criticisms of the campaign registry and these industry standards. And so this idea of establishing a trust score, this is something that has been criticized, that the campaign registry and MNOs evaluate the purpose of a campaign or the volume of text messages that will go out, and can determine based on content, for example, a trust score. So there have been public interest groups have publicly submitted letters to Congress. There's information that on the one hand, this is designed to protect consumers, but is this blocking speech that should be free, to go out and text message? And again, it's not the government, it's not exactly a First Amendment issue because this isn't a government entity reviewing text messages in advance, but it certainly raises concerns. And another confusion and an area of criticism is that the industry standards are different. The definitional standards are different from the TCPA, for example. They're different from the FCC's definition of peer-to-peer text messaging. And what channels or what type of text messaging are we really trying to control in the name of preventing unlawful robocalls? Are we really trying to stop the doctor's office from sending out appointment reminders to the 10 people, or that sort of thing? So sometimes the use cases and the policy don't quite align with the actual mechanism for registering campaigns and the threat of blocking that can seem to be overbroad. And as I mentioned, the standards are variable, so that has been confusing, as well as how to allocate responsibilities among customers, vendors, and everyone in between. So kind of wrapping up here, we want to really think about what is the role of cloud communications providers. And I think number one, those of you who are here, this is a first step to be educated about this system, the campaign registry, the costs, the consequences of failing to register, so you are informed and then can help your customers if they run into problems. So you're ready to work with your vendors and informed. We're seeing that some cloud providers or campaign service providers, those who provide a text messaging platform for their customers, sometimes will take on the work of registering on behalf of their customers and set up portals, and many of you may have seen this. So they assist and assist them with registry and assist them with understanding how to navigate that system. So I think it's important, again, just to be educated and to understand also that the fines, the penalties, the threats of blocking, these are variable enough that you shouldn't just kind of take it or leave it. Understand that you can go back and question and see if there's a better way, a better fit, a better way to make sure that your traffic is handled. And just quickly here, I think, understand that there is an opportunity to provide this service to your customers. And so I'll just wrap up with these takeaways before we move on, that it's an opportunity to help your customers. You can negotiate and work with your vendors and find a solution. It's not a regulatory obligation, so definitely engage in conversations. And another thing for cloud communications providers is take a look at your terms and conditions. And there are many ways to allocate the risks and burdens of compliance between your vendors and your customers. So look at those contracts and your terms and conditions and start to build in and address 10DLC and how to register with the campaign registry.
Okay, well, hey, Linda, thanks so much for that. It's important really to kind of have this perspective as to what these moving parts are, and I think you did a nice job in there. I think the key takeaways for us in this thing is that it is now it's in the industry's hands by and large in terms of making up, quote unquote, these regulations, and it's evolving, and it could be somewhat arbitrary and structured in a way that is not friendly to landline-based text messaging. Because my understanding is that mobile-to-mobile calls are all considered to still be P2P. It's only when you get into these landline ones that you'll get into a place with the 10 TLC from a landline enabled phone number. So along those lines, we have Ari from phone.com up. And Ari, in our conversations, you bring real world experience about how this is impacting your business, your customers, and so forth. And, it raises the clarity as to not only the opportunity, but to the challenges that we want to make sure are not being overly burdensome. Can you help share some of your experiences?
Yeah, sure. And thank you again to you and to the CCA. Good afternoon, good morning. I think Linda just really outlined pretty much every aspect that we're facing and we're challenged by. But what I would like to call attention to is that everything was about campaigns, marketing campaigns, even though the definition is so wide. We are facing a situation where we can totally distinguish and accept the need to protect from unwanted robocalling or texting and just registering any campaigns, even if it's very small, even if it's a sole proprietor, whether it's a plumber or a doctor that wants to send messages that are somewhat automated, notifications, etc. And all of these scenarios we can accept, we can work with, we can, as Linda mentioned, we can negotiate, we can talk to our customers, to our vendors, etc. And I'll talk from a more selfish perspective, we have a large customer base that are what you would call micro businesses or behavior that is very similar to just regular conversational texting when it comes to what they do with sending a text, with sending an SMS. The result here is that even if you get a phone number from phone.com, which is not a landline and it's certainly not a mobile line, it's kind of an over-the-top second line, and you send a text message the way we all send text messages, again, in a conversational way, we will get penalized one way or another. Different vendors behave different ways. We don't work directly with the mobile carriers, with the T-Mobile or AT&T. We work with wholesale vendors, which most of you are all familiar with. And each vendor of such treats us differently, and we have to react. We have already been penalized, or rather not penalized, but blocked. So customers call us and say, why can't we send texts? It's tedious, and in most cases we just keep asking that question of what's the definition of the campaign, what's the definition of the registration. They had one slide there that showed the different requirements that we have to put on the campaign registry, and for a small company, needless to say, it's extra burden. I'm looking at it as not the spirit of this whole operation or the whole 10 DLC. I don't want to use the word campaign, but the whole concept of what the campaign registry is meant to do. For me, I'm defining it as some way of, and I know it's not the whole picture, of blocking the concept of a over-the-top second line phone service. And that's what's happening to us. About 50,000 accounts like that we have to look at every one of them. If they want to send one text message a month, there has to be some registration. There is some risk of blocking it. I'd like to just raise a question about a company we all know and kind of wonder what will happen to them, and that's Google Voice. Google Voice, obviously, you all know what it does and how it does. When a text message comes from a Google Voice number, what will happen? Now, phone.com has a service that can take you from the simplest level of a Google Voice text message, second line, all the way to a complete enterprise PBX with hundreds of users, and also companies that would use us for real campaigns. So again, distinguish the difference, accept the difference, but it's that bulk of the small customers that we're dealing with. It's totally conversational SMS. That's what we're facing a problem. As for all the details, I think Tim can talk more from Sangoma on examples of how you're dealing it. We have our team is facing that challenge. He can just probably talk to some of the same challenges that we have. And again, it's ongoing. It's tedious, and it's not the spirit, in my opinion, of what the issue is trying to solve. It's just an attempt to kind of grab everything. I'll kind of stop here, but that's a lot of what we're facing.
All right, thanks a lot for that. Yeah, it is kind of it's more than tedious. A point of clarification right there. For these individual text-enabled landlines, are you registering every one of those as a campaign?
So again, we're talking to our vendors. We're negotiating. We're looking at options. There's we're trying to obviously our main goal is to offer the service to our customers and not have them blocked when they send texts. And there are certain dates that we're all trying to kind of run around and try and figure out, get an extension, not get an extension. We're trying to address all these aspects, but there are also fees. It's not just about register. It's, do we register? Does the customer itself have to register? How do you take a customer that pays you 20 bucks a month and tell them now you have to register your number if you want to send SMS, even if you're only going to do 60, 70 texts a month? Again, I'll call it conversational SMS like we do, not or even if it's a teenage girl, right? Those are the challenges. Not any real large enterprise where 10 bucks won't make a difference, or of course if it's a real campaign, however broad definition, even if it's again the plumber putting a notification 3 times a day of when they're visiting a client. It's good enough for me. That's a campaign, okay. But it's that wide definition that's challenging. And I think the carriers that we work with, meaning the wholesalers, are also confused. And some are taking very, very conservative and aggressive approach. Some are not. We're all dealing with the same situation. How to? It's not even one answer for this. Everyone of our partners dealing it is providing us a different answer. So we have to kind of take it all into consideration.
Okay, very, very good. Thanks, Eric. So hey, Tim, from your perspective here at Sangoma, and I'm familiar with your company with VoIP Innovations, you guys have done a lot to help cloud communications companies source phone numbers and things of this regard. It's great to have you here to maybe share a little perspective of what you see from Sangoma's, implementation and other service providers you might interact with, and these registries and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. We're kind of in an interesting position in all of this because we sell service directly to enterprises through hosted PBX as well as our SipStation platform, and we're one step up from that at the network provider level as well with VI Communication Services, which is our wholesale SIP provider. Ari really did a great job at kind of vocalizing what we're dealing with on the retail side, the direct sales side, and that's a confusion behind who should be needing to register and what is considered a campaign. A lot of that stuff is kind of written out, but doesn't really make sense to our enterprises that are customers of ours, just because we have several of those smaller customers, like Ari mentioned, that are sending one, maybe two messages out a day. And now they're being forced to kind of register that as a campaign to be able to continue sending it. And there are pros and cons that we're seeing with the campaign registry overall. It is giving us a little bit more leverage in terms of support with making sure that these messages are being received on the other end. But overall, it's starting to make everything look a lot messier. And we're seeing that a lot on our wholesale side, the VI Communication Services. Right now, we are allowing customers to either go into their portal and register their campaigns from there, or we have a couple of larger SMS providers that are just going directly to the campaign registry and registering there. We've been seeing a lot of customers kind of fall into the campaign registry's sole proprietor use case, which is kind of a very, very low, or according to them, very low 3,000 messages a day use case. And that seems to be working for a lot of these smaller customers, which is good for us because, as Ari mentioned, kind of getting a $20 a month customer to swallow, paying an additional $15 a month for their campaign and their brand registration is a little hard. So the sole proprietorship is a nice option for all of these really smaller customers, and we're happy to see that. In terms of the larger kind of marketing campaigns, what this is actually built for, we're kind of letting people know of CTIA's messaging standards, and they have an acronym called SHAFT that they're working with, and these are basically things that you shouldn't be messaging with, especially in 10 DLC, and that's sex, hate, alcohol, firearms, and tobacco. And we're kind of pushing that out to our customers. Most of our customers wouldn't be texting with that stuff, and that does also include vaping, CBD, cannabis, and kind of those fringe things that may not directly fall under that acronym. The short code messaging is available for those that are sending messages about tobacco and alcohol, but you have to have a campaign that does age verification, age gating. So, but in terms of 10 DLC, it's really working on limiting the actual content that's being sent. And I definitely see the value in trying to cut down on a lot of the unwanted messages. And a lot of people, I'm sure, get those messages all the time. In terms of phishing, SMS is used pretty often for phishing as well. There was something like $54 million that was reported stolen to the FBI on phishing, including SMS voice phishing. So I think that it's a good thing for them to start working towards. I just think it's really a mess right now, even though the campaign registry is integrated with US Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, or US Cellular rather. The only ones requiring it right now are T-Mobile and AT&T. Verizon and US Cellular have this as optional right now. And even with that, AT&T and T-Mobile are having different vetting processes, different attestations that they're doing for different campaigns, and it's just really right now very difficult to try to figure out what you need to do in order to register the campaigns and get the throughput that you need, because even though we have this centralized location where you can register and they will notify all of the different carriers, the different carriers are still treating the messages differently, whether that is lowering throughputs or just outright gray routing is what they call it, which they just don't send the message to the end recipient. So yeah, it's messy. It's a great idea. I just think that it's going to take some time for them to kind of clear that stuff out. And we're trying to help our customers by as much as possible. Something that we have a few customers that are selling numbers for personal use, and our carrier does allow us to go through a extremely invasive vetting process to be able to consider their traffic peer-to-peer, which is definitely nice for those personal messages. If I were to send my sister a message, that wouldn't need to be registered as a campaign, but that process includes a setup fee and is incredibly invasive. So it's nice that option is there, but I feel like they need to do a better job at communicating that, as well as kind of easing up on the business to consumer messaging that they're doing right now.
Great, Tim. What's important about why we're having this event today is really kind of captured in your conversation. And in a word there, messy. I mean, there's just so many different moving parts and different interpretations of what you have to do, that just getting it right in the level of effort to take care of what we would consider to be basic things is a concern. And that's why we're trying to take that up here at the CCA. So with that, we are a quarter of the hour, and we're ready to answer any of the questions that we are capable of responding to. I don't see much in the chat window. So
there was actually one question. Ian had one question. Ian, go ahead, power up your webcam and ask it yourself.
Powering up webcam. Yeah, hi guys, thanks very much indeed for that information. Quick question just relating to us here, Europeans. If we've got US roaming mobiles who maybe interact, let's say, with a restaurant who's got a confirmation booking service, et cetera, is that going to touch a US carrier, or is it kept local?
A good question.
It is a good question. And I think about, GDPR, privacy, all of these issues where it's a US citizen in Europe in a restaurant. And I think for this business text messaging framework, you would want to see which booking confirmation service is used. If they use a local number, I would look at the booking confirmation service and where are they located and what number do they use to send that message.
So if I assume that I'm a London restaurant using a UK-based text messaging service, I'm using a number that they can call back to because I've got a central reservations sort of thing. So it's all built on a customer experience sort of thing that allows either a text or a voice conversation with the customer. The mobile's roaming, so the UK provider is assuming that this person is UK-based, not thinking about US regulations. If it gets blocked, I'm thinking it's the action that we're trying to mitigate here. Is the US carrier going to understand that it's an in-country situation out of territory?
I wish I could answer that question definitively. Whether anyone outside of the US would need to register with the campaign registry if they're using a phone number to keep it from being blocked. But my initial reaction would be no, even though the campaign registry is meant to protect customers of US wireless carriers. If that phone number that the booking confirmation service is using would never touch the US PSTN, it never, I don't think that it would need to be, I don't think that there's a strong risk that that number would be flagged or blocked as spam.
Well, I suppose there's two scenarios. I'm in the US and I'm booking my restaurant before traveling, in which case I'm going to be in country, and when I'm actually in London or in a European city and it's the day before my restaurant, that may be a different case. But it would be interesting for European providers to know whether or not there are circumstances in which they may come into scope.
I think certainly with the STIR/SHAKEN framework as well, authentication levels, attestation standards, and now we're talking about voice calls and text messaging, how when you're roaming and when it's a US wireless carrier's customer, will those calls be marked as spam or blocked? I wish I could, again, I can't give you a definitive answer about that.
I would think a lot would depend on who that restaurant is using.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just about, I mean, if somehow, as an example, it comes through us, I don't know why a London restaurant would use us or something, but it would be blocked just if we don't register it, right?
Ian, those are all good questions, and the truth is, this doesn't seem to be very well thought out, and that's why we're kind of at a loss for exact answers. We're going to get to the bottom of it. Mark and I, Cloud Communications Alliance, we have a plan to kind of follow through on this to get to the bottom. But the truth is, the more detailed your questions, the less answers we're going to have, because it's not well rolled out at all.
Okay.
I can also add that you have scenarios where customers would try and port their numbers. So if you register it with one carrier or through one thing, then you move it to another carrier on your own, leave a certain provider to another, you got to do it again. I mean, it's just not. There's a lot of scenarios here.
Yep. Hey, you other folks who are on the call, our guests today, have you had any examples or circumstances where your texts have been blocked, similar to what Ari described a little while ago? Chad.
So yeah, I have, but I was actually pulling up an email that I sent to the campaign registry, and it was regarding Canadian phone numbers. So I'll just read what I asked, because I think it may explain a little bit of what you may run across. So I sent Brandon over at Campaign Registry this question. You previously mentioned that Canadian accounts should not need to register for Campaign Registry. However, I'm wondering if it will be an issue if some of the accounts have a handful of contacts that have US numbers. Also, will it be a problem if some of their Canadian contacts are visiting the US and roaming on one of the networks here? What will happen if these accounts are not registered and text messages are sent to an occasional US number? And he said, a Canadian company sending to Canadian subscribers or numbers does not need to register. That said, if they are sending messages to US numbers, then yes, they will need to register. If they are primarily sending to Canadian numbers, then the odd message ends up going to a US number. I don't imagine, that I don't imagine it will be an issue if they have not registered. So it sounds, yeah, they are starting, it seems like they're trying to still work this out, but that was a decent response to my questions.
That's great, Chad. Thank you for that. Anybody else? Any experience with this at your levels?
Oh, but regarding your second question, I have had text messages blocked. Absolutely, and and so we have had to register them, and I think that they were kind of warning us, I guess, to get them registered because the fees are coming.
What kind of messages were? I mean, was it a campaign in your mind, or was it just an occasional text that was blocked?
It was both. So we have customers that do the, you know, send bulk messaging, but then also the one-to-one. And, you know, some accounts in particular, some phone numbers were blocked where, you know, some of our accounts weren't, and it was just random.
Thanks, Chad. That's good information for us. Thank you.
Yep.
Mark, back to you.
Well, any other comments or questions? Okay, well,
I don't know. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. Oh, you were
I
gonna
was
say
just
something?
going to say, that I've actually had issues with, you know, customers when they're registering accounts. They will, like, you need to make sure that you have the legal business name that you're registering with the campaign registry. Otherwise, you know, those accounts will not be verified, and that's where you're going to have problems sending the messages. It's a big pain, but you know, as long as you have that built in your system where they can fill out legal name and DBA, it makes a big difference into, you know, how many of your accounts need to be re-verified and all that, because that's a big expense that you'll incur if you don't have that in your process.
Very good. Thanks, Chad. Well, everybody, in terms of wrapping things up here, just a few thoughts regarding what the CCA is doing to help this along. First of all, as I said at the top of the thing, we all know that messaging is prolific. It is just huge, very important means of communication, person to person or application to person. Many of our customers that we service, have the privilege of service, I know we want to make sure they have these tools. The other thing that goes on here, which kind of this gets swept into, is an appropriate concern by our policymakers and our industry about, you know, illegal behavior, right? Spoofing and fraud and things of this regard. And we've seen with Stir Shaken that activity being very significant here this past few years. And now we see the mobile industry with texting following suit. Interestingly enough, you know, the Stir Shaken thing was an industry-led issue back in its infancy, and then the FCC jumped in to mandate certain things. And now we see kind of the inverse of that, where the FCC said, okay, this is an information service. The industry now takes over, and they have this disparate system of what's what and who's who. So we need to sort this out. We're reaching out to the folks at the CTIA, which is the trade association of mobile carriers. We've knocked on their door already, and with mixed results. We want to reach out to the mobile carriers and talk to them about where these things are going, the campaign registry. Linda, you had mentioned something in there about, you know, hey, this is not a foregone conclusion on things, and reach out. It also means that people need to know how we reach out. How can you get certain things addressed and solved? And kind of like back to our issue on Stir Shaken, the key thing on the Stir Shaken was the originating service provider and their ability to attest to who was doing this thing. And within there, you put the burden on them to make sure that the bad guys weren't, you know, misbehaving. So perhaps, you know, there's ideas we've been kicking around about, you know, maybe de minimis amount of traffic where, you know, if you're a doctor's office sending out just dozens or scores of messages for appointment reminders, or a restaurant, that, you know, that these ones don't have to rise to that bar of what would be a quote unquote campaign. So anyways, these are things that we're kicking around. The question, Ian, you had there about what happens in Europe, kind of got sort of covered about the Canadian conversation here, although that still uses the 10-digit phone numbers. But these things I have notes on, and we'll look to follow up on this as well. So I'd like to thank our panelists here. You guys are great. I really appreciate your contribution to this issue and to the CCA. And Joe, I'll leave it back to you, sir. Can't hear you. Muted.
Thanks, Matt. I was muted. Thanks for joining us today. This is an issue that we're going to follow up with the Cloud Communications Alliance. It's really one of the top things on our agenda. It needs to be clarified. As Mark said, we have no problem, blocking robocalls and bad actors, but it's the good stuff that should get through, and our members and the providers should not be penalized. You'll be hearing from us about more information once we kind of gather that together. But again, we're working on it today, this afternoon, working on it some more. Also, Hardy Lipscomb, you actually found the spelling error on our first slide. We're going to be sending you a pass for the next Cloud Comms meeting, and Karen will be taking care of that later today. Everybody, thank you. Have a good day. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or any one of the panelists, and we'll be sending you a copy of the recording later today, so you can look through it and share it with your coworkers. Again, thanks a lot. Everybody have a great day.